A man worth more than most small nations stood in the cold light of a bus station at 6 in the morning, holding $300 in 20s, and he was about to learn which of three strangers he would never forget. His name was Walter Boyd, and almost nobody in that station would have known it. He wore a grey coat that had seen 10 winters, a knit cap pulled low, shoes scuffed at the toe on purpose. He had dressed down for a reason that had been eating at him for months. The board that bore his name had grown impatient with a thing he kept saying in meetings, a thing the younger executives found quaint. He kept saying that money found the wrong hands too often, that you could not measure a person by what they earned, that the people who spent the least were sometimes the ones who gave the most. They had smiled at him the way people smile at an old man's sayings. So at 62 years old, with $4 billion to his name and a heart that had grown tired of conference rooms, Walter decided to test the thing he believed. He would hand $100 to 3 people who looked like they needed it, and he would watch what they did with it, and he would learn something he could not learn from any spreadsheet on earth. What he did not know, standing there with his coffee going cold in a paper cup, was that one of those 3 would change the way he understood his entire life. The bus station on Claiborne Avenue smelled of diesel and old coffee and the wet wool of people who had waited too long in the rain. It was the kind of place the city forgot on purpose. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead, 2 of them dark, and the benches were the hard plastic kind designed so no one could sleep on them, though people tried anyway. Walter had chosen it because it was honest. Nobody performed at a bus station at 6 in the morning. Whatever a person was, the station showed it. He picked his 3, the way you might pick anything you are afraid to choose. The first was a young man in a hooded sweatshirt, maybe 20, pacing near the vending machines with the restless energy of someone who had not slept. The second was a woman in her 50s with a cane and a grocery cart full of cans, her coat held together with a safety pin. The third was a woman near the far window, sitting very straight on the hard bench with a folded paper bag in her lap and a thermos beside her, watching the door the way a person watches when they are waiting for someone who is late. She had the stillness of a person conserving everything, even motion. Her coat was clean and pressed and old. Her shoes had been polished to hide how worn they were, which was its own kind of telling. She did not slump the way the others slumped. She sat the way a person sits when they have decided that being tired is no excuse to be anything less than upright. Her name was Renee Tilton. She was 34 years old, and she had been awake since 4. Walter approached the young man first. He told a small lie, the same lie he would tell all 3. He said he had found the money on the floor by the ticket counter, that it must have fallen from someone's pocket, that he was too old to chase anyone down, and the station was nearly empty, and would the young man take it, please, and do something good with it. The young man looked at the 520s for a long moment. Then he took them, said, "Thanks, man," and walked straight to the vending machine and then out the door. And Walter watched him cross the street toward a place with a neon sign that was not selling anything a person needed. That was not a judgment. Walter had made himself promise it would not be a judgment. The young man was tired, and the world was hard, and $100 was $100. Still, Walter felt the small ache of a thing not landing, where he had hoped the woman with the cane was. Next. She heard him out, her eyes narrowing, and then she laughed, not unkindly, and told him she had learned a long time ago that nothing was free, and she would rather earn her keep than take a stranger's pity. She would not take the money. Walter pressed gently, and she pressed back harder, and in the end he respected her too much to keep pushing, so he tucked the 20s back into his coat and wished her a good morning. She was not the lesson either, though there was something in her stubborn dignity that he carried out of the station with him. 2 down, 1 left. Renee did not see him coming. She was rereading a letter she had read so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth, and when Walter cleared his throat, she startled and folded it fast, the way you fold the thing that is private. He gave her the same lie about the money on the floor. He expected one of 2 answers, the young man's quick yes, or the cane woman's proud no. He did not expect what she did. She looked at the 20s in his hand. Then she looked up at his face, really looked, the way most people had stopped looking at anyone years ago. And she said, soft, that she could not take money that belonged to somebody else, that somewhere a person was going to reach into their pocket and feel the cold place where it used to be, and didn't he want to try the counter again, leave a note maybe? Walter said the counter was closed and the owner long gone, and the money would only sit in a lost and found drawer until some clerk pocketed it. He watched her weigh that. He watched her think it through with the care of a person who had learned that every dollar was a decision. And then Renee Tilton did the thing that would not leave him. She took the $100. She thanked him with her whole face, and then she stood, gathered her thermos and her paper bag, and walked across the station to where the woman with the cane sat guarding her cart of cans, and she crouched down so they were eye to eye. And she pressed the 520s into the older woman's hand, and closed the woman's fingers over them, and would not let go until the woman stopped trying to give it back. Walter stood very still by the window and felt something move in his chest that he had not felt in a boardroom in 20 years. He could not hear all of what Renee said. He caught pieces. She said something about how it wasn't his money or her money now. It was just money that needed to be somewhere useful, and the older woman clearly needed cans that came already full instead of empties she was collecting to turn in for change. The cane woman argued Renee won. She had a way of winning that did not feel like winning, a way of making a person feel chosen rather than pitied. And Walter, who had negotiated against governments, watched a woman in a thin coat do in 90 seconds what his entire philanthropic foundation had failed to do in 10 years. She made a gift land softly. She made it land without shame. Then Renee straightened up, picked up her thermos, and walked out the far door into the grey morning, without looking back, without any idea that the tired old man by the window was watching her, and without any idea who he was. Walter did not follow her. Not yet. He stood in the station a while longer, holding his cold coffee, and he thought about the letter she had folded so quickly. He thought about the way she had looked at the door like she was waiting. He thought about the fact that a woman who gave away $100 she clearly needed was a woman who needed it, and that there was a whole life behind that choice he could not see. He had set out that morning to learn something about strangers. Instead, he had found one stranger he could not stop thinking about, and he made a decision that would have horrified his board if they had known. He decided to find out who she was. It took his people 3 days. Walter had resources that most people could not imagine, and he turned a small fraction of them toward a single woman from a bus station. And what came back made him sit down in his enormous quiet office and put his face in his hands. Rennie worked nights cleaning the surgical floor of Mercy General Hospital, the same floor, as it happened, where Walter's own foundation had once cut a ribbon on a wing. Nobody from the foundation ever visited again. She had worked there for 6 years. She made a little over $14 an hour. She had a son named Theo who was 9 years old, and Theo had been born with a heart that was built wrong, a valve that did not close the way it should, and for 9 years Renee had been carrying him from appointment to appointment on a single income and a bus pass. The letter she had folded so fast at the station was from the children's cardiac program at a hospital 2 states away, a place that did the surgery Theo needed, the surgery Mercy General was not equipped to do. The letter said Theo was a candidate. The letter said the procedure and the travel and the recovery would come to somewhere near $90,000, and that her insurance, the thin plan that came with a $14 an hour job, would cover almost none of it. The letter said the offer was good for 1 year. She had been saving for 2. She had $1,900. And on the morning Walter met her, on the morning she gave away $100 she needed more than almost anyone in that station, Renee had been sitting on a hard plastic bench waiting for a bus to take her to a second job she had picked up on weekends, a job folding laundry at a hotel for cash. Because $1,900 was $1,900 and $90,000 was the moon. Walter read the file twice. Then he stood at the tall window of an office that looked out over a city he owned a good portion of, and he understood, finally and completely, the thing his board had been smiling at him about for months. He had been right. The people who spent the least sometimes gave the most. He had just never met one until a Tuesday morning in a forgotten bus station, and now that he had, he could not unmeet her. And the easy thing, the thing any billionaire could do, was to simply write a check. He almost did. His pen was actually in his hand, and then he stopped. Because he understood that Renee was not a woman who would take a check from a stranger any more than the Kane woman would have. He had watched her refuse to keep $100 she had every reason to keep. A check for $90,000 from a man she did not know would land on her like an insult, like pity, like the very thing she had spent her whole life refusing. If he wanted to help her, and he had never wanted anything so plainly in his life, he was going to have to do it the way she did things, softly, without shame, in a way that let her keep her dignity whole. So Walter Boyd, who had not done an honest day of manual labor since he was 19, made a phone call to the director of Mercy General Hospital and asked a strange favor, and 3 weeks later there was a new man on the night cleaning crew of the surgical floor. He was older than the others. He was slow with the floor buffer and slower with the supply cart, and he asked too many questions, and the supervisor would have fired him in a week if a call had not come from somewhere high above the supervisor's pay grade saying the new man stayed. His name tag said Walt. The crew called him the Old Man, and on his third night, pushing a mop down a corridor that smelled of bleach and the particular tiredness of 3 in the morning, he met Renee again, and she did not recognize him at all. Why a man with $4 billion would put on a grey uniform and mop a hospital floor at 3 in the morning is a question worth sitting with. If you have ever given something quietly, ever helped someone in a way that cost you something, and asked for nothing back, you already know the answer, and I would love to know what you gave. Walter could not have explained it to his board. He could barely explain it to himself. He only knew that the check felt like a door slammed and the mop felt like a door opened. And he wanted for once in his life to be on the same floor as the person he was trying to lift, not floating somewhere above her writing numbers on paper. Renee was kind to the old man the way she was kind to everyone, which is to say, without thinking about it. She showed him where the supply closet kept the good gloves. She told him which supervisor to avoid on Thursdays. When she saw him struggling with the floor buffer that bucked like a live thing in untrained hands, she stopped her own cart and showed him how to ride it loose, how to let the machine do the work, laughing softly at how a grown man could be so afraid of a piece of equipment. She brought him a butterscotch candy on his second night and told him the late hours went down easier with something sweet in your cheek, and Walter, who kept a chef on staff and had not eaten a piece of hard candy since the Eisenhower administration, sucked on it dutifully and found that she was right. Walter, who had been afraid of very little in his long life, found that he did not mind being laughed at by her. He found he looked forward to the part of the night when their carts crossed, to the small ordinary kindnesses she handed out the way other people checked their phones, without weighing them, without keeping score, as if generosity was simply the resting state of her and not a thing she had to decide on. He learned her in pieces, the way she had given herself to the station in pieces. He learned that she clocked out at 6 and caught the bus by 6:15 and had Theo at his grandmother's by 7, so the old woman could watch him while Renee slept 3 hours before the boy came home from school. He learned that she kept a photograph of Theo taped inside her locker, a gap-toothed boy in a baseball cap 2 sizes too big, and that she touched it once at the start of every shift the way some people touch a doorframe on their way out. He learned that she never complained, not once, not about the hours, or the pay or the back that clearly hurt her by the end of the night, and that the only time her voice tightened was when another cleaner mentioned a copay, and Renee went quiet and bent harder to her work. He learned smaller things too, the things you only learn from being beside a person in the long dead middle of a night shift. He learned that she hummed under her breath when she thought no one could hear. Old hymns, mostly the kind a grandmother sings, and that she stopped the second she noticed anyone near. He learned that she kept a roll of butterscotch candies in her cart pocket and gave them out to the patients' families who fell asleep in the waiting room chairs, pressing one into a stranger's hand on her way past with a quiet word about keeping their strength up. he learned that she knew every nurse on the floor by name and that they knew her, that they slipped her the leftover sandwiches from the break room rather than throw them out, not as charity, but because Renee had a way of making a person feel they were doing her a favor by letting her take a thing off their hands. Walter watched a charge nurse named Yolanda fold a turkey sandwich into a napkin and set it on Renee's cart without a word passing between them. The whole transaction built on 6 years of small trust, and he thought about the foundations he funded that spent millions trying to build what these two women had built for free. One night, he watched her stop her cart outside a closed patient door where a young father had fallen asleep in the hallway chair. His head ticked back against the wall, a child's drawing crushed in his fist. Renee did not wake him. She took the thin blanket off the top of her supply cart, the one she kept for her own cold hands at 4 in the morning, and she laid it over the man's lap, and she straightened the crushed drawing and set it on the chair beside him where he would find it, and she moved on without ever knowing Walter had seen. He had spent his life surrounded by people who performed their generosity for cameras and reports. He had forgotten there was a kind that happened in empty hallways at 3 in the morning with no one watching at all. He was watching now. He could not look away. One night, near 4, they took their break together in the empty family waiting room on the cardiac wing, and Walter, who had grown bolder, asked her plainly about the boy. And Renee told him. She did not tell him to be pitied. She told him the way you tell a thing to someone safe, an old man on the night crew who would never matter to her future and could therefore be trusted with her present. She told him about the valve and the year and the $90,000. She told him about the $1,900 she had saved dollar by dollar in a coffee can on top of the refrigerator where Theo could not reach it, and how some weeks she added $4 and some weeks she had to take $6 back out for the light bill, and how the can never seemed to climb the way she needed it to. She did not cry, though her hands wrapped tight around her cup of vending machine coffee. She told them about the bus rides to the cardiology clinic across town, 2 transfers each way, and how Theo had learned to read the route map at 6 because he wanted to help his mother know where they were going. She told him the boy had never once asked why other kids could run at recess, and he had to sit on the bench, that he just sat and kept score and called it the most important job on the field, and that this, more than anything, was the thing that kept her getting on the bus at 4 in the morning. Because a child who turned a bench into the most important job on the field deserved a heart that would let him run. And then she said the thing that broke him clean in half. But she said she knew she might not make it in time, that the year ran out in March, and that if it did, if Theo missed the window, she had already decided she would not let him see her grieve it, because a boy should not have to carry his mother's despair on top of his own bad heart, and she would find a way to be all right where he could see her, and fall apart only on the bus. Walter sat in that waiting room at 4 in the morning in a uniform that said Walt, and looked at a woman who'd given away $100 she needed, and decided privately that whatever it took, Theo Tilton was getting his surgery, and Renee was never going to know it had anything to do with the old man mopping floors beside her. Knowing what he wanted to do and doing it the right way were 2 different things, and Walter spent the back half of February learning just how proud Renee was and how nearly impossible it is to give a gift to a person who has built her whole life around not needing one. He tried first the smallest thing. He left a $50 bill folded inside her locker, tucked behind the photograph of Theo. No note. He thought she would simply find it a little luck, a small mercy from the universe. Instead, she spent the entire next shift asking every person on the floor whether they had lost $50, holding it up, refusing to keep what she was sure belonged to somebody else, and when no one claimed it, she turned it in to the lost and found at the front desk, where it sat in a manila envelope with her own neat handwriting on the front. Walter watched her do it and understood that he was dealing with a woman who would return the moon if she found it on the ground. He stood at the end of the corridor with his mop going still in his hands and watched her press that envelope across the desk to the night clerk, watched her describe exactly where she had found it, so the rightful owner could be sure. And he felt the particular helplessness of a man who has spent his whole life solving problems with money meeting the one woman money could not reach. She had taken the one gift he left her and given it back to the world. He almost laughed. He almost wept. He had never in his life met an obstacle he respected more. He tried, next, to engineer a raise. He made a call. The hospital suddenly and inexplicably announced a new hazard pay adjustment for the overnight environmental services staff, an extra $2 an hour, effective immediately. Renee was grateful. She was also suspicious in the quiet way of a person who has learned that good news usually has a bill attached, and she asked her supervisor 3 times whether it was real and whether it would be clawed back, and Walter, listening from down the hall, did the arithmetic and felt the floor drop out of his hope. $2 an hour, 40 hours a week, was $80. Over the month she had left until March, it was a few $100s. It was a kindness, it was not a heart surgery. He was trying to fill an ocean with a teaspoon, and the year was running out. The thing about a deadline is that it does not care how much money you have. Walter had spent his life able to buy time in every form time could be bought. He could not buy this. The cardiac program 2 states away had 1 surgical slot that matched Theo's case in the surgeon's calendar, and it was the 2nd week of March, and after that the surgeon left for a year on a teaching post overseas, and the window Renee had been racing toward would close. Walter found this out the way he found out everything. Now, quietly, through people who did not know why he was asking. And when he understood that the real obstacle was not only money but time, that even his $4 billion could not simply manufacture a surgical slot out of March, he did something he had not done in many years. He asked someone for help instead of ordering it. The surgeon's name was Dr. Aaron Pruitt, and he had operated on more failing child hearts than almost anyone alive, and he had never heard of Walter until Walter called him personally one evening and talked to him for an hour. Not as a billionaire to a surgeon, but as one tired man who had seen something to another. Walter did not offer to fund a wing. He did not dangle his name. He told Pruitt about a bus station and $100, and a woman who turned in $50 she desperately needed, and a 9-year-old boy with a baseball cap 2 sizes too big, and a valve that would not close, and a year that ran out in March. He told him about the blanket laid over a sleeping stranger, and the butterscotch candies pressed into the hands of frightened families, and the coffee can on top of the refrigerator that never climbed the way it needed to. He told him about a boy who called the bench the most important job on the field, and Dr. Pruitt, who had grown as tired of grateful donors as Walter had grown of his board, listened to the whole thing, and somewhere in the middle of it, Walter heard the man stop being a calendar and start being a person, heard the chair creak as he sat forward, heard the particular silence of a doctor remembering why he had wanted to do this in the first place. At the end he was quiet for a moment, and then he said he had a slot the 2nd week of March and that he would hold it, and that the money could sort itself out later because some cases you take because of what they are, not what they pay. He asked only one thing in return. He asked Walter to make sure the mother never felt she owed anyone anything, because in 30 years he had watched gratitude crush people nearly as often as illness did, and a child needed a mother who could stand up straight. Walter hung up the phone and sat alone in his enormous house and wept, which surprised him, because he had thought that particular faculty had dried up in him decades ago. Now there was only the hardest part left, which was telling Renee in a way she could accept. Walter had learned her well enough by then to know that if a stranger called her with news of a free surgery, she would assume a scam and hang up, because the world had taught her that nothing good arrives without a hook. The news had to come from inside her own life. It had to come from someone she trusted, and the only person she trusted who also knew the truth was an old man on the night cleaning crew named Walt, and Walter realized with a strange grief that to give her the gift he would have to give up the disguise, that the moment she understood would also be the moment the comfortable, dignified, equal friendship of 2 people pushing carts at 4 in the morning ended forever, because you cannot be ordinary to someone once they know you are not. He chose to do it. Anyway, he chose her surgery over his disguise. That was in the end the whole measure of the man. He did not do it with a flourish. There was no envelope slid across a table, no check held up to the light. On the last night of the 1st week of March, when their carts crossed in the bleach-smelling corridor, Walter asked Renee to take a break with him in the family waiting room, And she did, because she always did, and he sat across from her and set his vending machine coffee down and told her, simply, that he had to confess something and that he needed her not to leave the room until he finished. He told her his real name. He watched it mean nothing to her because she did not read the business pages of anything, and that almost made it worse. So he told her about the bus station. He told her he had been the tired old man with the cold coffee who handed her $100 and lied about finding it on the floor. He told her he had watched her give every dollar of it to the woman with the cane, and that he had not been able to stop thinking about it since, and that he had used what he had, which was a great deal, to find out who she was. He told her about the file. He told her he knew about Theo, the valve, and the year, and the $1,900, and the $90,000 she could not reach. And then, before she could rise out of her chair, because she was already rising, her face, going from confusion to a hard weariness he had never seen on her, he told her the last thing fast. He told her the surgery was arranged. The second week of March, Dr. Aaron Pruitt, the best there was. The cost was handled, all of it, the procedure and the travel and a place for her and Theo to stay during the recovery and the wages she would lose while she was gone. It was done, it was paid, there was no hook, no paper to sign that cost her anything, no debt. There was only a boy who was going to get a heart that worked. Renee did not throw her arms around him. That is not what happened, and it would be a lie to tell it that way. What happened was that Renee sat back down very slowly and put both hands flat on the table as if to steady the room, and asked him, in a voice gone thin and shaking, why? Why? Her? Why $100 at a bus station had turned into this. And Walter told her the truth, which was that she had given away money she needed to a stranger she would never see again, in a forgotten place at 6 in the morning where no one was watching and there was nothing to gain, and that, in 62 years of a life spent around the wealthiest people on earth, he had almost never seen anyone do a thing like that. And that when he finally did, he understood it was the most valuable thing he had ever witnessed. And that a man who had spent his life unable to buy the one thing worth having would be a fool not to spend some of his money protecting it once he found it. For a long time Renee did not speak. The fluorescent light buzzed. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped its patient's steady rhythm, and then she asked him the question that told him everything about why he had chosen right. She did not ask how much. She did not ask what the catch was. She asked whether the woman with the cane had ever gotten home all right that morning, the one she had given the money to because she had thought about her since and never knew her name. Walter said he would find out. And then Renee put her face in her hands at a break room table at 4 in the morning and cried the way a person cries when a weight they have carried so long it became part of their body is finally impossibly lifted off. And Walter sat with her and did not say a word. Because some moments do not need a billionaire's commentary, they only need a witness. The surgery was on a Wednesday. Dr. Pruitt repaired the valve in just under 5 hours, and when he came out to the waiting room to find Renee, he found her sitting next to an old man in an expensive coat that did not match his tired face, and the surgeon told her the words she had been waiting 9 years to hear, that it had gone well, that the heart was closing the way it should, that her son was going to grow up. Renee stood and she did not collapse, and she did not scream. She simply pressed one hand to her own mouth, the way she had pressed the 20s into the cane woman's fingers, and she nodded, and she thanked the doctor, and then she turned and found Walter's eyes and held them, and in that look passed everything that did not have words. She had spent those 5 hours in a way Walter would remember the rest of his life. She had not paced. She had not wrung her hands. She had taken the coffee can of folded bills out of her bag, the $1,900 she had saved, across 2 years, and she had held it in her lap the whole time. And when Walter quietly asked her why she had brought it, she said she did not know what else to do with her hands, and that the can had been the surgery to her for so long that she could not bring herself to set it down until she knew. When Dr. Pruitt said the word fine, she had looked down at the can in her lap, the thing that had stood for so much fear for so long, and she had let out a breath that seemed to take a portion of 9 years out with it. Later, she would use that $1,900 to buy Theo a bicycle and his grandmother a coat that closed without a safety pin and a tank of gas for the bus driver who would let them ride free more than once when the can came up short, and she would keep the empty coffee can on the shelf where the photographs went, because some things you keep not for what they hold, but for what they carried you through. Theo woke up 2 days later asking for a hamburger and complaining about the hospital food, which is how everyone knew he would be fine. He met the old man from his mother's job, the one who had come along, and decided immediately that Walter was the most interesting adult he had ever met, because Walter answered every single one of his questions seriously, including the ones about how many cars a person could own and whether you could swim in money like in the cartoons. Walter told him you could not swim in it, that it was harder and colder than it looked, and that the best thing money could do was disappear into something good and never be seen again. And Theo, 9 years old and freshly whole, said that sounded boring, and Walter laughed harder than he had laughed in years. Renee went back to Mercy General after Theo's recovery, because she wanted to, because the work was hers, and she would not be talked out of it, though. Walter quietly made sure the hazard pay stayed and the schedule eased. She kept the photograph in her locker. She added a second one beside it. Theo on a baseball field, mid-swing, the cap finally fitting his head. And the old man named Walt did not come back to the night crew because the disguise had served its purpose, and a thing like that cannot be put back on once it has been taken off. But a man named Walter came to dinner at Renee's small apartment once a month and brought nothing fancier than bread, and sat at her table and listened to a boy talk about everything under the sun, and was, for the first time in his long and crowded life, simply welcome somewhere as himself. He never told his board the whole story. He told them only that he had been right about the thing they had smiled at, that money found the wrong hands too often, and that the people who spent the least sometimes gave the most, and that he had proof, though it was not the kind you could put in a slideshow. They did not understand. He no longer needed them to. Months later, on a warm evening, Walter sat on the front step of Renee's building, while Theo threw a ball against the wall, and Renee brought out 2 glasses of lemonade, and he told her finally that he had found the woman with the cane. Her name was Doris. She had gotten home fine that morning. She was doing better now, in a small place of her own that a foundation had quietly helped her into, though she would never know which foundation or why. Renee was quiet a moment. Then she smiled, and she said, "That was good. That was real good." And she watched her son catch the ball against the warm brick wall in the last gold light of the day, the boy's heart beating strong and steady and whole inside his chest, and she understood for the first time how far $100 could travel when it left an open hand. Kindness, it turns out, keeps a longer memory than money ever could. $100 given away in a forgotten station at 6 in the morning had traveled through a billionaire's tired heart and a surgeon's steady hands and come back as a boy throwing a ball in the evening light, and not 1 cent of it had been wasted. If you have ever given when you had little, when no one was watching and there was nothing in it for you, I hope a story finds its way back to you the way it found its way back to Renee. And if it has not yet, stay close, because the next one I have to tell you is about a man who walked 9 miles in the snow to return a wallet, and the family inside the house he knocked on, and the thing he could not have known was waiting for him there.